PascoRadio.org and RemnantRadio.org. You'll also be hearing it on local radio on AM 1610 WDCX. This is Viz, and with us today is Andrew Colvin, and this is kind of a different topic for us. It's something that you folks may have come across. Some of you may know it very well. I'll confess I don't, but it is intriguing. And Andrew's going to be here with us for this next hour, and hopefully for some time beyond that in subsequent days or weeks, to speak to the topic of the Mothman. And Andrew, welcome to the Grassy Knoll, and thanks for spending some time with us.
Hi, thanks.
All right, you're welcome. And all right, what is the Mothman? What is the history behind all of this?
Well, the modern history starts in 1966 with the first sightings of the Mothman, which were occurring in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is on the Ohio River, and it intersects with the Kanawha River there as well, and there were a lot of sightings about 50 miles from Point Pleasant, about 50 miles up the Kanawha to Charleston, West Virginia. So that was the main area where the sightings were. And there was a precursor back in the 1790s in terms of the Mothman. A lot of people believe that there was a chief cornstalk who put a curse on the town, and that the Mothman somehow is an outgrowth of that curse.
All right, the chief put a curse on what I would expect is like a European settlement?
Yes. Well, Point Pleasant at that time was an important fort because it was at this juncture of the rivers there, and the Kanawha River was really important because it was about the only way you could get from Virginia to Ohio. There were a couple of other ways to go as well, but this particular river had salt mines on it, and these were really important to the settlers and to the Indians. And there were also some asphalt or oil pits that the Indians used for healing and things. And later on, when oil was discovered in the 1850s, I believe, with the Rockefellers, a lot of the mining started in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, or the oil pumping.
Just a digression. I think it's interesting you mentioned it because when the Rockefellers first started to mess with oil and market it, they did it as some kind of healing or health benefit. And so the Indians were using this for the same purpose, weren't they?
They were.
That's amazing, isn't it? Jeez.
They were rubbing themselves with it.
and I guess it was working.
and the pharmaceutical industry is an outgrowth of the oil industry. Yep. So that sort of tradition is carried on.
And maybe in subsequent shows we can talk about some of the interesting things about the Rockefellers, West Virginia, and et cetera. But getting back to the origin of the Mothman, now this tribal chief put a curse on this particular settlement. I'm assuming because basically we got in the way, didn't we, the colonists?
I'm not an expert on too much on that particular battle, but apparently it was the largest battle, the last large Indian battle with the army, and in terms of Cornstalk, he apparently was murdered in cold blood while in captivity by an army intelligence team. And one of the themes I've looked at in terms of looking at the modern sightings is whether or not there's a connection, not a vague connection to the Indians, but is there a connection with the Army intelligence? Because that's sort of where it started.
Now, you would say that there is some kind of documentation or lore or whatever that substantiates that the figure, the being that is known as Mothman, did exist as far back as that late 18th century. Is that correct?
Well, in terms of Cornstalk, he didn't actually say the Mothman is coming, or anything like that. But we have it worldwide. I mean, you have a long history of bird-man creatures in every culture, really, and going back as far as the Sumerian legend. So, I mean, it's been with us for centuries, millennia. So.
So is Mothman? Let's put it this way: are there Mothmen? Is this something of some kind of species?
It's hard to prove one way or the other. You certainly have your cryptozoology crowd who wants to see it as a large bird, like a thunderbird.
Mm-hmm.
However, the more you look into it, the more you find that there really is a supernatural quotient in it. Even in terms of the Indians, I mean, they didn't believe thunderbird was just a plain big bird. They believed it was a deity, a supernatural bird, and it's the same for the Garuda, which is what this kind of creature is called in Asia.
That is a Garuda?
Garuda. And John Keel actually entitled his book, The Mothman Prophecies, I think there was a subtitle, something like the story of the feathery Garuda. I don't remember the exact subtitle, but he initially had more of an emphasis on it in the book, and about half of the book was edited out and subsequently made its way into his book called The Eighth Tower. So if you want to read about the Mothman, it's best to read both books.
All right, would you give us those titles once again?
The Mothman Prophecies, which everyone knows, and The Eighth Tower.
Mm-hmm. All right, now, you've done a documentary as well, haven't you, about this the Mothman?
Yes, it's called The Mothman's Photographer, and it's available on my website, andycolvin.com. Click on Films. We're still loading content onto the site. We've got a large photo show that we're doing. I just spoke with a gallery here in town, and they're going to have a Mothman extravaganza. We're going to have about 300 images. We're going to have multiple screens showing the documentary series, which is about 30 hours long. Selling the book, having talks, recording people's stories, paranormal stories, and so on. So it's that's as soon as that show is being finalized, then we're going to load all those images onto the site.
I want to run that website by our listeners again. That's Andy Colvin. That's COLVIN.com.
Yep.
And I just called up your website. Are you primarily, if we can buttonhole you like that, are you primarily a photographer, or what would you hang your shingle out as far as your occupation?
Yes, I would. I almost a photojournalist, but I do have a heavy background in art, fine art, and experimental video, experimental photography. At some point, I sort of settled into a straight documentary approach, though. Mm-hmm. And so most of my photography these days is straight photography. Prior to doing photography, though, as I said, at the age of 8, I suddenly was able to draw and paint, and for a while there, I did portraits at county fairs and things around West Virginia, and went to art school in Cincinnati, the Art Academy of Cincinnati, and then I went to the University of Texas for grad school and studied film and photography there.
I'm looking at your website on the home page. Is one of those stills a black and... Oh, yeah, that's definitely the Brooklyn Bridge, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Now,
that was a picture I took of the World Trade Center 6 weeks before the 9/11 disaster. And something we can get into later once we've gotten through the basic Mothman story is the fact that I knew I had a friend as a child there who came to me and said that he had seen a vision of this disaster in 2001 of exploding buildings. And so we have a precognition of it back in 1967. So there's a connection to the 9/11 tragedy and the Mothman of some kind.
All right, and like we said, we'll get in this deeper, but that you mentioned that year. Is it that year that your friend had spoken this?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, when there was this precognition, this was from your friend. Is that correct?
Yes. I actually experienced it, though, because he was claiming that it came from standing in a certain spot on his property. And he said, if you stand in the spot, you will be able to see it. And I stood in the spot, and I did indeed see it, and it scared the hell out of me.
All right.
I jumped out of that situation, and we sort of had a falling out, which I can go into later. That's kind of interesting.
Okay, now, are you always a West Coast guy?
Have I always been a West Coast guy?
Yeah.
Since college, yes.
All right. I mean, are you an Easterner by birth, or?
Yes. My father's from New York, upstate New York. Part of the Colvin clan that produced Verplanck Colvin, who was the guy who surveyed the Adirondacks and turned it into a national or a state park. And when he was in the military, he was stationed in Norfolk. Incidentally, right at the time of the Philadelphia experiment.
Oh, gee.
And he met my mother at Virginia Beach, and she was from West Virginia. She's from a county there in West Virginia that I've been finding out. It seems as if there's a lot of women from this county who have psychic abilities, and some of them have been recruited for government service. But they met, and they lived in New York for a few years. My sister and brother were born there, and then they moved to West Virginia, where I was born, and my other sister was born.
Well, two things real quick, and we'll get back to the mainstream of what we're supposed to be talking about, and that is the Mothman and the prophecies, and etc. But I'll tell you this much. I lived in Vermont for 2 years, and on the western side of Vermont, especially in the town of Pulteney, I don't know if you've heard it, but there are a whole load of Colvins there. And that's the first time I ever encountered that name, so they're probably your blood, no doubt about it, huh?
Is this Putney, Vermont?
Pulteney, which is north of Putney.
Because I think Putney is where John Irving, the author, lives.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this is Pulteney, and like I said, Colvin, until I encountered your name, the only other encounter I've had with that was the town of Pulteney, because the Colvin clan is kind of generational there. So, at any rate, so much for that. And also, I grew up across the river from Manhattan, and I watched the trade towers be built. That your friend would say something like that in 1967 is very curious, because really they weren't all that tall at that time. Yet we knew where they were going. But as we watched them get built, Andrew, I'll tell you, all of us said they're going to fly a plane into that someday. I mean, it almost begs it, if you know what I'm saying. So
yes.
That he had said that early on, that's quite interesting.
Well, the interesting thing about that vision was that it was from the water level in the Hudson. And I'm not sure what that means. But
and you actually, did you stand in that spot and see it, or?
I just know that I know I've been to New York many times, and I went to the towers and looked at them a couple times, and I could, I forgot about this thing for many years, so I wasn't even thinking about it. But now that I look back, that was sort of the angle that it came from. Would be from the New Jersey side,
right?
Being over.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I got caught up there that day. I was actually visiting and walking and not plugged into any media. I walked and I walked, visiting old sites and such as I'm given to do. I didn't know until 2:30 what had taken place, and then I was just absolutely taken aback. And I heard some strange things that day. One of them was probably one of the jets that came upon the area, and it's a sound you don't usually hear there, so it was very, very telling. At any rate, we'll jump back to the Mothman and going back to the curse from Cornstalk. Were there any sightings, or was there anything that you can uncover through the centuries between and the years between, the late 18th century up to 1967, where others had encounters or had saw this creature?
Yes, there's an account, and you can find it in Mark Hall's Thunderbird book. It was one piece of information in there that I found interesting, and I can't recall the fellow's name, but it was earlier in the century. It was in the early 1900s, I think, somewhere up the Elk River, I believe, and the Elk River also plays into this. It ties into the Kanawha River, and then it goes on down to the Ohio River. And actually, the first Mothman sighting really was on the Elk River, about 20 or 30 miles north of Charleston, and there was some guys were digging a grave, I believe, and saw something fly over, and then there were these contacts started occurring in Point Pleasant soon after that. This would have been November of 1966.
All right. What did the Mothman do? Why are we talking about this in terms of what was the fallout from the Mothman? Was it the prophecies and its uncanny coming to fruition?
There's a couple of different things that were happening. There were these prophecies that people were seeing, and visions they were seeing, and there were other paranormal things that were sort of going on, which no one quite knows if the Mothman was responsible for. Things such as dead animals, animal mutilations, and Men in Black sightings, UFO sightings. That kind of thing was also going on. And my interest in the documentary has been mostly to look at what happened to the witnesses after they had their experiences. And you do find a lot of psychic things happening to them afterwards. They're able to know when things are going to happen, like on an ongoing basis for the rest of their lives, basically. And also create creative changes, lifestyle changes, that sort of thing.
All right, so those who had visually encountered this creature were touched in a certain way. Did they have any kind of enhanced powers, or did they have any kind of unusual circumstances after the fact? And also, did this necessarily lead to their, shall we say, untimely death?
There was actually very little to go on in terms of people dying. I think it was alluded to in the movie that there were Mothman witnesses on the Silver Bridge when it collapsed, and that's another aspect of the story, is that this bridge collapsed 13 months later after the sighting started. And people seem to feel that the bridge collapse was connected to the Mothman because the Mothman was supposedly seen flying over the bridge that day. However, a week before that, there had been men seen on the bridge tinkering around with it. And so whether or not the Mothman brought it down, I personally don't think the Mothman brought the bridge down. I think he was alerting us to something about the bridge. But it's really never been proven, as far as I know, that there were any more than a few people on the bridge that had seen Mothman or had some connection to him. There's been a lot made of this, of course, with the Mothman death curse that Loren Coleman's been talking about. But it's I think what it leads to is some people end up believing that the Mothman caused it, and that's certainly not what I think. Based on if you look at the history of these birdmen throughout different cultures, it's generally seen as a positive force that is scary when people first encounter it. It's sort of in the sense that whenever we do have to jump through hurdles in our lives and cross obstacles in order to change for the better, there's always a difficulty with that. It always seems scary at first. So I think there's sort of a symbology of that going on in the Mothman.
Loren Coleman wrote what title? Was that Mothman and Other Curious Encounters?
Yes.
Okay, and the two titles again, I'm sorry you ran us by us before, but John Keel wrote The Mothman Prophecies, and the last one is?
The Eighth Tower.
The Eighth Tower, okay.
And there's also an interesting one called it's called Mutant Cats. Is that what it's called? Let me see, I've got it right here.
Okay.
It's kind of obscure. It actually is the first thing that you wrote following the events. The Mothman Prophecies wasn't written until about 7 years after the bridge collapse. But within just 2 years, it's called Strange Mutants. And the subtitle is From Mothman to Demon Dogs and Phantom Cats, and that's by John Keel, and it's about 100 pages long. And it's got a chart in there that Loren Coleman put in his book. It's got all of the. Maybe I should look at that right now. That'd be a good thing to share with listeners.
Sure.
It's a nice chart in there of all the different sightings in chronological order.
Are you now? Are you looking at a hard copy book, or are you on the internet?
I'm not on the internet. I don't think this is on the internet.
Okay.
It's a pretty rare thing. Somebody found a box full of them a couple of years ago, and they were sold new on Amazon. But it's interesting because the wording is a little different than you find in the Mothman prophecies.
And then, did you want to read us something from that book?
It's going to take me a minute because it's not bound. I've got it loosely.
Well, let me do a little business here, and I'll give you a minute if you need it. I don't mind waiting by any means. You're listening to the Grassy Knoll on AM 1610 WDCX. We have with us Andrew Colvin. The website is andycolvin.com. That's Colvin. He is the producer and the maker of the documentary, The Mothman. Let me get this straight. I got to look through my notes here again. The Mothman's Photographer, and that's from Andy Colvin. Andy, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. That is in DVD form, is it not?
Yes, it's 5 DVDs, 6 hours each, which is EP mode. So if you have a high-definition TV, it's going to look better.
Okay.
It's going to look perfect on a high-definition TV, and if you have a regular TV, it's going to look a little bit pixelated.
All right. And on your website, where can they click to find out how they can order it?
Well, if you go to the website, you can just click on films, and it'll come up there.
Okay, I got it.
Or you can email me, Andy at andycolvin.com, or you can go to eBay. I've always got one on there on eBay. Just type in Mothman, and you'll find it.
Okay. Well, I went to that link on the films, and there it is, Mothman's Photographer, and yes, okay, $39.99. That is, you said that's 5 DVDs. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Okay.
And there's also a bonus audio disc, which has a field recording that occurred in 2002. There was also a third child involved directly with these sightings at this guy's property, and she came with me, and she's actually in the film quite a bit, doing different psychic readings and things. She's a very psychic person. And but in 2002, I was with her and my niece, who's also had some a Mothman sighting, and we went to this spot and encountered an energy field. And this is, again, it's at the same spot that we had this precognition of 911 at. And we also had built a shrine that we kind of wonder if that drew the Mothman to that spot or not. I tend to think that this spot has a history that goes way before us, though, which I may go into later. But we encountered an energy field of some kind that you could see very subtly, and it was moving, and there were lots of different physical effects that occurred, and we recorded it. It was so dark that I didn't use it as a DVD footage. I just have the audio, but it's pretty interesting. You can tell that there's some odd things going on, and we're talking about what's happening.
Okay. All right. Now, even though I kind of distracted you again, did you find the information for which you were looking?
Yes, it's just a chart of of some of the sightings. I don't know if it certainly can't be all of the sightings, because we had a lot of sightings in Charleston that didn't make it into the newspaper. There were lots of things were on TV or on the nightly news, and I had liberal parents, so I was able to watch the news at night, and I would, wait with bated breath to hear the recent sightings, and they wouldn't necessarily be in the newspaper, and they're certainly not in Keel's book. There's a couple of sightings from the area that are in Keel's book, but not, certainly not all of them. And it looks like they have about 20 sightings listed here. And, the total number of, quote, official witnesses is about 100. And Jeff Walmsley, who's written a book called Behind the Red Eyes, the Mothman, he estimates another 100 in Point Pleasant that saw the Mothman but didn't report it. So we're looking at about 200 people in Point Pleasant alone. And then I would imagine many, many more in Charleston.
Has anyone ever captured any kind of photographic or videographic evidence?
There's been a couple of photos that have been floating around that appear to be hoaxes, at least to me. There's one of a bird-like thing jumping off of of a bridge in Huntington, West Virginia. And there's a shot of something flying off of the World Trade Center as the planes hit, or after the planes hit.
Are you talking about that photo where something is flying in from behind, if you would, the towers? Is that correct? It's kind of like on the upper right quadrant of the photo, if I remember correctly.
The one I'm thinking of is the building is on the right, and this thing is flying toward the left, and it looks. I mean, to me, it just looks like someone cut and paste, a flying man image.
Yeah, that's.
Or it's a piece of debris.
Well, it's the one I'm thinking about. Others have tried to call it an angel as well. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the same one I've seen. I think that's pretty much a hoax.
Yeah, but I think that there's something to this photo that we have, and the nice thing about it is that it can be verified because it's not it's an old photo from the 70s, and I'm looking for someone, possibly at Kodak, who can verify that this photo is not hoaxed.
Okay.
That's an important thing for me to have done here, and so if any of the listeners out there have a lead for me in terms of getting that photo to someone who can analyze it,
mm-hmm.
I would be appreciative.
All right, and where is there any place where those people can see that?
No, there isn't, but I'm gonna do that today. I will have my web guy put it up there on the site.
All right, we'll tell you what. By the time people hear this, it'll be up. So folks, go to andycolvin.com and you'll see about which we speak, and that'll be really interesting and great that you're doing that. But I am curious also. With all these sightings, does it seem to have to necessarily pertain to geographical West Virginia? Don't worry about the dog. It's okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Happens all the time. You're human beings. It's this happens. But what about the sightings? I mean, does it seem to be connected always to West Virginia? I mean, has it been seen in the fringe areas in Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, even Maryland, maybe?
Yes, there were some sightings in 2002 in western Pennsylvania, which got some press. There have been reports coming into the different Mothman discussion lists of sightings up the Ohio River toward Pennsylvania, toward Pittsburgh,
mm-hmm.
and some from eastern Kentucky, southeastern Ohio. Yeah, definitely. We had a guy that I interviewed for the documentary who saw Mothman on the border of Florida and Georgia right after the disaster, the 911 tragedy. And I speculated in the documentary about what that might mean. I don't want to really go into it right now because I'd like to stay with the basics here, but.
Well, is this moth? I'm getting the feeling. I don't know if this is correct or not, and so I'll obviously ask you because that's why you're here. And that is, like in ancient Indian lore and such, I believe, and perhaps in other cultures, when one saw an owl, it was a portent of not good things to come. Is Mothman connected to this at all? Like, it is good that you should not see the Mothman?
Well, this sort of gets back to that dichotomy I was talking about before, which is that it appears to be something scary that we should be afraid of. And maybe for some people it is. All I can say is that in my experience, it was scary, yes, but it affects. I think it's there's some kind of interplay happening there with this entity, especially if it's an interdimensional entity, as John Keel believes it is. That interacts with the human mind, then it changes you, and I think that change is for the better. And once you get into looking at the Hindu cosmology of the Garuda, you see it in a different light. But I think some of the other things that some people tend to confuse with the Mothman are actually more linked to a death experience, like a certain Men in Black, the black dogs, the large black dogs that people see, the large Black Panthers. Those tend to be more, even historically, if you look at the Celtic lore, those are a little more related to the death experience.
Well, when you're talking about Men in Black, I mean, we always think about, obviously men in suits. Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yes, and the problem is, though, is that I think that I think some of these guys are government agents and some are paranormal. For instance, when my father died, there's a whole story with my father and this, and these events, but when he died, he saw a man in black outside the hospital window, and my sister couldn't see him. So my father was having a vision of the man in black, and that's a definite, death connection. But I think these men in black that were seen in Point Pleasant, some of which were wired for sound, they had wires running up their legs. These guys were flesh and blood men in black.
Yeah, and we spoke, well, we didn't speak about this, I think we emailed about what's going on. West Virginia is an extremely interesting state. I think there's a reason why the X-Files, per se, use that as a location for a lot of interesting governmental stuff. And before I go any further, I'm just going to say to you that those who, Chris Carter and the group for that Murdoch program, who created the X-Files, certainly knew the shape of things to come. And like a lot of their predecessors, like H.G. Wells and such, they wove it into some kind of fiction. And sometimes some kind of, shall we say, like little ludicrous turn, where people would just dismiss it all as fiction. But actually, what they centered on in the state of West Virginia, because of its connection to the Rockefellers, that's a pretty interesting state, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. And I think a lot of that has to do, again, with going back to the oil industry, and the Rockefeller control of the state, and how the state got involved in chemical production so early. Really at the turn of in the 1890s, they were already building these large chemical plants and forming the modern corporation. This is really where the corporate model was pioneered. The process of taking public money and finding ways to funnel that through the corporation and into private hands. And in the case of West Virginia, a lot of these corporations were owned not just by the Rockefellers, but by their partners in Europe. So a lot of this money was going out of the country even. And those who know anything about the coal industry know that a lot of the coal mines were owned by the British.
Is that right? Are we talking about going back to the 18th century and such, or are you talking about even more modern day, like the 19th century and the 20th century?
Yeah, I'm more or less talking about the beginnings. I don't know. It's so hard to find out now who owns what. I mean, it really is. If you look at the mergers and acquisitions that occur in the chemical industry, it's just mind-blowing. There are hundreds and even thousands of transactions each year with these companies trading parts of themselves to others. Mm-hmm. And so if you were to go into Charleston now and try to find out who owns the plants, you could never figure it out. And that's sort of the Standard Oil model. It's a really secretive company, and it's some have said that it's more secretive than the CIA. So.
I'll go along with that, no problem. All right, and maybe another day for a little more discussion on West Virginia. You talk about the Mothman prophecies, though, and it sounds like there was a particular person who just elicited all these, prophecies or what is going to happen in the future. But that's not necessarily so, is it? Right.
Are you saying that the prophecies tend to be a little off?
No, it's just that when one hears about the Mothman prophecies, you're thinking about some kind of supernatural entity, a singular person perhaps, or creature who is giving these portending and ominous at times looks into the future. But that really isn't the case. The prophecies that are associated with the Mothman is not, they're not generated from a Mothman, are they?
Well, that's a good question. If you look at the Garuda, the history of the Garuda and the way it's viewed, it's generally seen as a crime-fighting deity. So I've tried to use that model to sort of lay that over the events and see if that makes any sense, and it's possible that it does, in the sense that if you look at the various prophecies, a lot of them have to do with these great crimes. They're assassinations and terrorist events. And so I just started trying to figure out, well, if the Mothman is a crime-fighting deity, maybe he's just trying to, by appearing in certain places and at certain times, sending a coded message of some kind, and by perhaps encouraging people to have these visions once they see him, sending a coded message to people that is sort of an otherworldly process that could happen at it. He's supposed to show up at critical times in mankind's history. So since I think a lot of us feel that way, that we're sort of at this point where we could be destroying ourselves with nuclear weapons. That this could be that process in action.
Has there been a latest sighting, to your knowledge?
Is there a very late sighting?
Yeah, the most recent, the last one anybody recorded, or...
There was one last year that was reported to the Mothman list that was, I think it was near the Willow Island nuclear plant. So, maybe there's some sort of connection to a nuclear event coming up. But, it's difficult sometimes to know how far off some of these prophecies are, because in the case of the one that we had, it was 34 years before it happened. And there was also a prophecy of a blackout in New York City that everyone thought came true soon thereafter, but I've talked to Keel about this, and that it may have been the big blackout that occurred in New York just a couple of years ago.
Okay. By the way, what was your take on Keel? I mean, his work is one that we would have to consider fiction, is it not?
His Mothman book?
Yeah, and the movie based upon it. How would you classify that?
Well, the book and the movie are completely different animals. The latest I've heard on that is that when they wrote the movie, they didn't want to perhaps pay him a lot, so they decided to go with a more fictional process, just for monetary reasons. I think they had some real budget crunches happening with the movie.
All right, so they cut him out for financial considerations as a scriptwriter and such, right?
I think so.
Okay.
And so the movie is really a work of fiction.
But what about the book then?
The book is not. No.
Okay. How did you take the Keel? I mean, did you find him somebody very passionate about this and serious? I would assume so.
He's passionate about a lot of things. I mean, he did a series of talks in the 90s that were he did about one a year, where he would just sort of report in on what he was studying, and he covers a really wide array of phenomena. And as far as the Mothman goes, he's been pretty tight-lipped about it ever since. I think he's only given about 4 talks on it. So it was an honor to be able to interview him at length about it. It's not something he does very often.
I want to tell everybody, again, you're listening to Grassy Knoll on AM 1610 WDCX. With us is Andrew Colvin. His website is andycolvin.com. He has done a 5-part video series entitled The Mothman's Photographer, and it's available on his website. Go to film, and you'll find out how to order it. And it got past me a little bit, Andy, and that is, did you live in West Virginia for any particular amount of time, or did your being there was based directly on you doing a documentary?
Oh yeah, I lived there as a kid. Yeah, I was born there and raised there until I left for college.
All right. Okay. Where can I ask you where you grew up in? What town?
Well, it's the west part of Charleston. It was actually called Mound, West Virginia, in the early days.
Okay.
If you can believe that. and there's a whole interesting history there with Mound. It was I've researched this looking at the history of the valley, and it turns out that the Kanawha Valley is the oldest valley in North America. And in other words, the Ice Age changed most of the landscape 10,000 years ago. It changed the Ohio River, but it didn't affect the Kanawha. So you've got the oldest, gorges, and this area where Mound was a gorge. It was a deep gorge. It's now been dammed up, and I looked at the history of the damming process for the river, and that's a pretty fascinating story where, again, they were planting these plants back in the 1800s, so they were bringing in French and German technicians to build the dams, and these dams were state-of-the-art modern dams. They were doing things on them that they hadn't even done in Europe. But they dammed up the river, and in the middle of the river there at Mound was an island that at one time, it must have been 100 feet high, just a big, tall sort of spike in the middle of the river. And this area had thousands of Indian mounds. Mm-hmm. Because when they, assuming that they buried the dead in some of them, some mounds were for the dead, but other mounds were not. But if they were putting the dead in some of them, they would have been canoeing them upstream. And once you got to Charleston, the falls in the river became so high that you couldn't go up any further. So if they were looking for a sacred spot, that would have been as far as they could go easily to deposit the bodies and have their ceremonies and things. So.
I've heard about the mounds out in the Midwest as well, and I've known people who have lived there. And have you heard the piece of lore that a tornado will never touch down on an Indian burial ground?
I haven't heard of that.
Okay, yeah, that's what they say out there. They say that in Ohio too, and from people that I ran into. I got to tell you, one, West Virginia reminds me very much of Vermont. I think there's a lot of obviously geographical and topographical similarities. And secondly, I'm going to tell you, I spent some time in that Ohio River Valley. I went to Ohio U for a while.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I'm on this one website too, besides yours, with Lauren Coleman, and there's a list of those who died in that Point Pleasant Bridge, which we're going to talk about. And a lot of them are in Gallipolis, and I've been in Gallipolis quite a bit. But I got to tell you, I played a softball tournament one time. Are you familiar with Mason, West Virginia?
Mason, yes.
Okay, well, I'll tell you this. A bunch of hippies we were coming down from Ohio U, played in this high-pitch softball tournament, and high arc, is like legendary in West Virginia. I got to tell you, though, Andy, those were the biggest human beings that we played against that I've ever seen in my life. And my desire that one day was not to win a game, was just to get out of there with my life, as I was playing third base and I'm looking down the barrel at a lot of right-handed hitters who were like 6 foot by 6 foot. And at any rate, that was my brush with West Virginia and athletics. So be that as it may, getting back to two things in the time that we have left, and the one thing is, when they talk about the prophecies, where did the prophecies come from? Why is that always connected to the Mothman?
Well, if you look at the history of the Garuda, you have a Messiah-like deity which came before Christ, which has a lot of similarities to Christ, actually. And I've gotten into some heated debates over this issue with Christians. But there appears to be a source from which if you look at there's a great book by a guy named Kersey. It's called The 16 Saviors. There were 16 messiahs that came before Christ around the world, and I think the Garuda would have to be classified as one of them. But he's there to change things for the better, and of course he would have to use human agents for that process, and all of these ancient messiahs are connected with prophecies. So there's a long history of prophecies being used to change the direction of the human race via human agents who receive these. And I think that seeing this bird could be, depending on the level of interaction one has with it, could be that kind of a process happening.
With regard to what happened at Point Pleasant, do you want to tell us a little bit of the background of how this is connected?
How Point Pleasant is connected to?
To the Mothman, and Alex, actually, can you give us a little bit of a thumbnail about what took place on that bridge back in, what was it? Was it November of '67? Yes. It was December of '67.
December, yeah.
Yeah. First of all, tell us what happened that night or that evening, because obviously it was only, I guess, about right after 5 o'clock or something.
Yes, the bridge was full with Christmas shoppers. It was a very cold night. I remember that quite well. And I remember when it happened and the news came over. It was shocking, but the bridge was filled with shoppers, and there had been some others had visions of floating packages in the water. People had dreams. I think even Mary Heyer, who was the reporter there that wrote most of these articles, she was writing for the Athens, Ohio Messenger newspaper.
Oh, jeez, really? Okay.
She had a dream of these floating packages. So now there's an oddity to this process. These people are on the bridge as they were every day at rush hour, but on this day the stoplight was broken, so the traffic was moving very slowly.
So that meant that there were more vehicles probably on the bridge than they might normally have been?
Yes. Now, in my mind, I think that's an odd thing, and given that this is something we'll probably get into later, but this bridge, this light being out, and also the fact that we had men on the bridge tinkering with it prior makes me wonder if this light wasn't out for a reason, perhaps to check and perhaps to watch the bridge and see who was on the bridge at any given time. They might have been looking for a particular vehicle to be on the bridge. If this is really as horrible as it could have been, if someone actually did sabotage this bridge, then that light being out could be a clue.
In other words, it would have been part of the whole scenario.
It could be.
Right.
And that would explain why the bird would be flying above it.
All right.
Too.
So now, considering that it's a benign and not necessarily an evil creature, it was trying to alert, perhaps, or whatever, but it was not necessarily responsible for it. If anything, it was trying to tell people perhaps something's up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you two questions. The first one is, exactly what was the official story about what happened to the bridge that caused its collapse on that, I guess it was December 15th evening?
The 13th I-beam failed. That was the official explanation.
And nobody had any idea beforehand that there was any kind of stress occurring that would result in this catastrophic failure?
Well, that's hard to know because we don't. First of all, we don't know who it was that was inspecting the bridge. If that's what they were doing, that's certainly. One would think that if the bridge was inspected, that there would have been some, report of that. On the other hand, there could be a cover-up in that the bridge was inspected, found to have problems, and nothing was done. And then, in order to not, have a big uproar, they just sort of covered that up. That could be another explanation.
All right, now, the other thing that piqued my interest, given the fact that we deal with conspiracies, and of course we realize that, after 4 years of dealing with people who commit suicide with 3 self-inflicted gunshot wounds, I have to ask you about what you said about there might have been an individual who might have been targeted for, shall we say, a hit. Would that be right? That might have been on that bridge that night?
That's correct. And, you know, there were, looking at the context of what was happening at that time in history in West Virginia, you have a lot of labor unrest. You have you have people threatening. You have strikes occurring. My father was on strike at the time. He worked for Union Carbide, and there was a lot of pretty radical talk going on in union circles. And my father was involved in that, and he actually told me that there were guys talking about blowing up the chemical plants. So you have a really serious situation, and I think there had to have been a response to that from the owners of the companies, in one form or another. And I think, and there were a lot of suspicious deaths that occurred and disappearances, and it doesn't necessarily mean that's what occurred with the Silver Bridge. It could have been something else. For instance, there was a famous, I don't want to call him a conspiracy theorist because he was actually an economist who worked on the JFK administrative staff. I think he was a member of JFK's cabinet. His name was Peter D. Beter, B-E-T-E-R. He's written a book called The Conspiracy Against the Dollar, and that was written back in the I think it was in the early 80s. He died in the late 80s. But he was a conspiracy theorist of sorts who had a radio program at the time, and he's the father of the Fort Knox gold conspiracy. He was a guy, he actually ran against Jay Rockefeller for governor of West Virginia. And my mother loved this guy. She loved his name, Peter D. Beter, and she loved his whole conspiracy angle. But he believed that the gold was being shuffled out of Fort Knox by some organizations connected somehow to the Rockefellers. And if that were the case, then that gold would have been moving up the Ohio. It's possible that there was a truck full of gold on the bridge, and it could have collapsed. I mean, there's a lot of different angles that you can go into.
Well, I got to tell you, I got to stop you right there because I'm a junkie for these kinds of books. Conspiracy Against the Dollar.
Yeah.
And the last name is Beter. B-E-E-T-E-R?
One E. B-E-T-E-R.
All right.
He's got a great explanation of what Nixon did.
In 73? What, with the gold standard?
Yes.
Okay.
And the book was written in 73, yes.
What a surprise. I'm pretty, honestly, I don't think this guy's a theorist. I think he probably had it pretty well down. I don't think there's anything in Fort Knox these days anyway, but of course that's what I think. But
well, he did a wonderful tape cassette series that he mailed out to people. He was a lot like Gray Barker. He had a following of people around the country, and he would produce these tapes and send them around. And you can actually find transcripts of them on the web if you do a search. And they're fascinating. I mean, he brings in some angles that are rarely covered by other theorists, including the White Russians. He was really intent on looking at the White Russian influence, and that certainly was in play in the area as well. We had a lot of spy activity going on in Ohio and West Virginia then. The FBI had a KGB general on their payroll. His name was Alexander Orloff, and he was in Cleveland. There's a lot of connections to Cleveland with some of these conspiracies in regard to the Mothman. In fact, the famous Man in Black Indrid Cold, who supposedly was from the planet Venus and took a couple of different contactees to Venus. This guy, Indrid, moved to Cleveland. We've heard that he moved to Cleveland later, which sort of implies that maybe he wasn't really from Venus.
Well, some people do make the connection between the two. So, how did this capture you though? Was it because you lived there? I mean, now you're decades removed from it. What has kept you so involved in what took place in West Virginia back, 4 decades ago?
Well, I can tell you how it started. It started with this friend who had this precognition, and he also claimed that he said the Mothman was coming to his home. He said that aliens were coming to his home. He said that the aliens had predicted his life, parts of his life in advance, so he knew what he was going to do when he became an adult, and it turns out that he did. He was supposed to work for NASA, and it turned out that he did work for NASA. His mother works for NASA also. But that was the first thing, this strange kid who he had really special qualities, extremely intelligent. He tested as a genius at age 8. We all seemed to have increases in our IQ levels after this stuff happened. Several kids did. We had like 5 genius kids in my 6th grade class. So I always remembered that. It was very odd. And then in the early 80s, then we had a weird UFO flap in the late 70s, which kind of had me wondering. And I was going to school at Marshall University, which is it's in Huntington, West Virginia. There were some strange things there. There's a whole Manson clan that kind of hangs out there. But then in the early 80s, we had a resurgence of things occurring, and I found out that Charles Manson had lived on our street, and also that Sarah Jane Moore had lived on our street, and that the two had known each other as children, and there was actually a guy interviewed on TV that I saw, and this is what sparked as an adult, it sparked my interest again in it, because I saw this guy on TV say, yeah, Sarah Jane Moore and Charlie Manson used to come into my store, and this is right at the end of our street, and this store was, and so it got me going again, and I started reading up on Manson and reading up on UFOs, and that whole paranormal genre. But it wasn't until '93 that I found Keel's book. So I've only been aware of Keel's angles on it for about 10 years.
All right, so that kind of rekindled your interest in the whole story.
Yes.
All right. Can you imagine living in a neighborhood with Charlie? And oh, gee, that what a hoot that is. Oh,
yeah, well, Sarah J. Moore lived right next to our grade school, where, like I say, we had all these genius kids, and the military actually came and was charting our progress to some degree. We had a very radical school there at the time. It was given funds by RFK, something called the Appalachian Project, and we were given a bunch of money to have an experimental school. And one day a documentary crew came to interview us all, and there was an Air Force guy supervising this process. So there's more there. There were some odd things going on there.